Welcome to this episode of the Wild Ohio Podcast. Today we're joined with our guest, Curt Wagner, who's a fishery management supervisor with the Ohio Division of Wildlife.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to see you.
Thanks for being here, Curt. So, the elephant in the room, or we should say the fish in the room we have here on the table. Curt, what we got here?
We got a steelhead trout.
Okay, so you're going to tell us all about steelhead today, and you're going to get me right because I not my expertise at all.
Yeah, definitely. Excited to dive into it, talk about it's a popular sport fish, a fish that we spend a lot of effort and time raising, and really provides a great angling opportunity in a lot of the seasons when there's not a lot of other fishing to do.
Has steelhead always been your level of expertise, or where'd you start with the Division of Wildlife?
Yeah, so it has not been at all. So the last few years I've been on a learning curve for steelhead as well. I started in 2008 as a fish biologist with the Division of Wildlife, and was a fish biologist for about 10 years, then became the fisheries management supervisor in Northeast Ohio. And really about at that time is when I took over more of the role in the steelhead management program and had to sort of get up to speed on, a lot of the nitty-gritty details on it.
Oh, wow. So anything stick out in your mind as like, whoa, I didn't know that?
Just the immense amount of effort that goes into sort of each year's planning of getting the eggs and just all the preparations that go into having a cohort to stock each year.
Oh yeah,
that's been really enlightening.
Nice.
Yeah, so there's a lot of behind the scenes with that we'll get into, but with the hatcheries and cool water versus warm water, it's a cool water species being a trout.
They're only found in the Lake Erie watershed.
That's right. Yeah, they're we could dive right into what steelhead are. So they're a life history of rainbow trout. I mean, plain and simple, they are just rainbow trout. They're not their own species, but they exhibit a life history that's really unique. And by life history, what I mean is like what they do and how they go about life. So steelhead are native to the Pacific Northwest, where they grow in the Pacific Ocean and then run into tributary streams to spawn. And as far back as late 1800s, early 1900s, various states throughout the Great Lakes, in an effort to sort of repopulate what had been a heavily commercialized and harvested native fisheries, we're looking for some alternatives that are both good for sport fish and good for food fish. And so they looked towards steelhead as that answer, knowing that they could run into freshwater streams in Washington and the Pacific Northwest. So in Lake Erie, in the Great Lakes as a whole, including Lake Erie, they run into our tributaries to spawn and then go back out and live, their adult life in the lake growing. And unlike the true salmons that come in and die, you've all seen like the bears eating carcasses, the steelhead don't die when they spawn. So that's why you don't see carcasses all over the stream. They come in, go through the motions of spawning and swim back out. And so to your answer, it is just the Lake Erie watershed that we have steelhead.
Awesome.
What's life expectancy? This is a huge steelhead example. I mean, just the size of that's a big steelhead.
And that could be only 5 or 6 years old. I mean, you start talking 7 or 8 and it's a pretty old fish in the Great Lakes.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So they're constantly swimming, they're constantly moving, but obviously they're constantly eating if that's a 5-year-old fish.
That's right. Yeah,
exceptional growth rate on that.
That's right. And all that growth is happening in Lake Erie. I mean, it's a very minuscule amount of actual foraging and growth happening when they come into the tributary rivers.
Yeah.
That's solely sort of that biological drive to spawn.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
shad?
What are they eating?
Shad?
Yeah, it's going to be shad. It's going to be alewife, emerald shiners. Those are probably some of the main ones. So it's going to be your soft finned, mid-water column fishes, prey fishes in Lake Erie.
So, Jordan, this is a big fish. Is this tend to be the biggest they can get, or how much bigger?
That's a big one.
That would be a big one. I mean, a benchmark that a lot of steelhead anglers will sort of lean on is, you break that 30-inch mark. You're talking a pretty respectable fish. You get into that.
And that's anywhere. That's anywhere you go.
Okay.
You start talking 30 inches in Alaska. You start talking 30 inches in Pacific Northwest, Ohio. That's a trophy fish.
That's a lot
all
of
the
meat
way around.
right there.
Yeah.
That's
a
big
fish Ohio pin, maybe.
It is. Oh, it's absolutely fish O. I think fish O for a steelhead is probably 28.
Yeah, I should know this, but it's less than 30. Yeah. It's probably upper 20s.
28 feels right.
Yeah.
So when they get back into Lake Erie, how long is that whole breeding portion of their life that go up into the tributaries?
Yeah, and so I'll give you a long answer, but that's kind of what makes the fishery so exciting, is it varies across individuals.
Okay.
And so as early fall, you'll start to get, you know, usually males, when they're about 2 years old, will start to sort of exhibit that drive to come into the rivers, and females more so when they're 3. This is, 3 years old from hatching. In the fall, they'll stage in the near shore areas of Lake Erie and the harbors and the breakwalls, and even there they provide a great fishery. So the weather's still kind of warm. They're really accessible to anglers from the breakwalls, from the piers and whatnot, and they're pretty heavily foraging still. They're putting on that fall binge before they come in and the water drops. And so spoons, spinners, like a lot of active type of fishing gear is really good in the harbor areas. But then, you get that sort of first cool rain of the fall, and that's the driver. It's flow, it's cooling temperatures, it's shorter daylight, and that starts to, do the cues for them to come into the river to exhibit that spawning behavior. And the cool thing about steelhead is they'll do that throughout really all the fall, and then again in the spring, just fresh new batches of fish that sort of across the 6-7 month window, we'll call these pushes or pulses of fish that come in. The anglers will call them runs. So, you kind of are watching, and when you see, good heavy rain come through, and then just enough time that the water clears up a little bit from that rain, you're pretty much sure that a new pulse of fresh fish have probably come in.
Really?
Yep.
Okay, so guys can almost set their fishing calendar by that. If they're out watching the weather, they know when to go to the rivers and try to catch these fish.
That's right. Yeah, late September, early October, it starts to get good up on the near shore and the harbor areas.
What tributaries are we finding them? I mean, you say they're coming from Lake Erie. Do we have them as far to the west side of the state as well, or mostly in the northeast? Yeah,
so another cool part about the life history of the steelhead is their homing behavior. So we specifically stock 6, I believe I have the number correct, tributaries, and I'll go west-east. So we have the Vermilion, the Rocky, recently stocked the Cuyahoga, Chagrin, Grand, Ashtabula, and Conneaut. I think that's 7 maybe. And so those are going to be the rivers that will get very predictable pulses of returns coming in that you can target as an angler and expect steelhead to be there. There's also this aspect called straying where it's not this perfect returning to the stream they were stocked in, and so some fish that's, let's say, stocked in the Grand as yearlings in the spring, maybe they end up running up the Ashtabula or the Conneaut. And you also have fish that don't run up one of the stocked rivers at all, and they run up some of the smaller tributaries. If you look at a map, there's the main rivers that I just named, but there's all these other shorter little creeks that dump right into Lake Erie, and almost all of them will get some level of strays that push in and kind of create a neat experience, but not necessarily that predictable program that we're trying to create with our 450,000 that we stock each year.
Wow. And we have hatcheries. We have one hatchery that stocks steelhead, correct?
That's correct. So statewide we have 6 state hatcheries, and these are all big sort of commercial grade facilities, and we only raise steelhead at one of them. It's Castalia State Fish Hatchery in the northwest part of the state. Yep. And there's a few reasons for that. Is even before the state bought it, it was a private hatchery focused on cold water fishes, focused on trout. So it's completely set up for raising trout species. It's in a region of the state that has a kind of neat geology, hydrology. There's the blue hole. There's a few blue holes up there. But on the property is essentially this daylighted pond that goes down to the groundwater, which is nearly an endless source of consistent cold water year round. It comes out of the ground almost zero oxygen, so we've done some pretty major capital improvements at Castalia to improve the oxygen in the water, and that's what trout need, is oxygenated cold water. And so, Castalia has a home run, has hit that out of the park, and has the great capacity then to raise, like I said, we raise and stock out 450,000. So we're starting with more eggs than that. There's this curve of eggs and younger ones dying, but the end product being 450,000, 5 to 7 inch spring yearling. So they're basically a year old at the time we stock them into the rivers in April, early May.
And they're imprinting in that river system as a fingerling.
That's right, and
that seems unique to them to be able to do that. And the reason I say that is we talked with Kent in Toledo about the sturgeon. And if you remember, they were very specific to trying to introduce those fish to that water source and that specific tributary way before they
I
were
think at egg level.
fingerling
Yeah.
size. They were releasing them in Sterling's version of fingerling, which was 6 to 9 inches.
Yeah.
But they were raising them within that watershed for the imprinting. So it's pretty unique, I would think, that you can put a fingerling in to a tributary and it can actually imprint to the fact of then going to Lake Erie, swimming all over the lake and coming back
And
to that
knowing where to
tributary.
go back, yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I mean, in fact, in the 70s and 80s, we did the research where we looked at fall stocked fingerlings versus spring stocked yearlings,
Okay.
and actually had a better return rate of fish stocked bigger, but in the spring. So presumably even less time, than fall stocked in the streams. And then recently, with some partnership research we did with the USGS, we did some tracking with some tags and some of these steelhead that we stock. And from the time we stock to the time they go out to the harbors, I mean, some of those fish, about half the fish were measured in like 24 hours. And 90% of the tagged fish were out in the harbor areas within like 3 days. So, I mean, we generally kind of assumed and sort of figured it was about a 1 to 2 week that they were in the stream before they started moving out, with the stream water temperatures warming up. And, I mean, they are just
They're
going
kicking,
out
they're
so
kicking
quick.
tail. Yeah, they're
And-
just screaming to the lake.
I mean, that imprinting of water chemistry or, whatever cues are happening in their little heads, it's happening quick.
When you mentioned the tracking and the surveying and looking at that, so fish management is a unique thing because, with wildlife management, we can see what we're managing, right? So fish don't live in a place that's easily accessible to be able to see. So you talked about a little bit about tagging and the pit tags. Why don't, just for someone that's listening, maybe give us a little bit of an overview of the two different types of tags that we kind of go to regularly, and then the different ways that we get those reports in.
Sure, yeah, I'll do one better and talk about a few more even. So at the
There you go.
most
Excellent.
basic, we can clip fins.
Yep.
Cheap, fast, and all is the fish has been handled. You don't have any individual identifiers.
On a steelhead, are we clipping the dorsal or are we clipping the adipose?
Often the adipose fin
Yeah.
when we do that for management.
Which that fin really doesn't have any kind of, does it do anything?
So it's very like short term. If you're doing a few weeks worth of research and you want to, sample a place every other day, you might do something like that. And then the next time, okay, do we already handle this fish or not?
Okay.
It's kind of a short term type of endeavor. Again, you don't know that individual fish's history. Next sort of tier up that we use, you mentioned pit tags.
Yep.
It's exactly the same tag that you do in your like cats and dogs, a tiny little like glass or polymer capsule that itself is not energized, but you have a reader, and then that reader basically pings off of it like a turnpike, like Easy Pass or something.
Yeah.
And it gives you the ID number. So that doesn't tell you anything about where the fish went, but it tells you like that fish is Henry and that fish is Sally. It gives you the individual identifier of that fish. And that's really powerful for research.
Well, it also tells you
And then-
that Henry's back.
Yes, exactly.
So,
and
yeah.
you know everything about Henry was stocked this time at this
Yeah.
size.
Yep.
And then the next step up, and this is what I was referring to with those tags where we know when they went to the harbor, are various telemetry tags.
Yeah.
And we have a really robust partnership with our federal partners, the USGS. Not to go too deep into it, but there's this whole program called GLADOS, which is the Great Lakes Acoustic Telemetry System. I might be butchering that.
We love our
And-
acronyms.
We do.
We just call it GLADOS. You got to think what it means. But across all of the Great Lakes and Lake Erie, and now up the Cuyahoga and up a couple other rivers, are these receivers that these telemetry tags can ping off of, and then you go download that data from the receivers, and there you can really create kind of a time-stamped map of which fish moved when and where. And that's what really gives us the power to kind of understand, okay, how quick are these fish moving out? In a couple of years, what percentage of them are returning? Which ones are returning to the same river? So, yeah, we're just embarking on some of that telemetry stuff in the steelhead world right now.
So we're raising them, but they're also coming back into the tributaries, and I'm assuming are successful in reproduction.
So generally, no, and
Okay.
that's a big question of work that we're working on right now, especially in the Cuyahoga. So I mentioned earlier we just added the Cuyahoga as one of the rivers we stock. Cuyahoga is pretty unique. I mean, we could go on and on about the environmental history of the Cuyahoga with the river being on fire.
Let's just talk how good it looks now.
Yeah, well, yeah. And so, I mean, that is why we're at the place we are with Steelhead.
Absolutely.
It's improved so much that it can now sort of support that contact recreation and fishing. Then you couple it with the fact that you have national park and multiple metro parks. The amount of publicly accessible land on the Cuyahoga is unparalleled.
Which,
And
for folks listening, if you're not familiar, one of Steelhead, for maybe not the best kept secret, but the best kept fish with a little bit of access. So much of those tributaries is private land access in the Northeast. So fishing opportunity has always been, maybe not necessarily a struggle, but not the easiest thing. It's not like going to Buckeye Lake down here and there's 5 boat slips that you can just easily access and get in and have that opportunity. That's kind of sacred ground up there, and when you do receive permission, it's held on to pretty tight, is my understanding of it.
Yeah. By adding the Cuyahoga as a program stream, so one we stock, it not quite, but almost doubled sort of the river miles of public access.
Wow,
for
that's
steelhead
great.
anglers.
I'm glad to hear that we were
Yeah.
able to do that.
But with that came questions from a great suite of conservation partners to your point about reproduction. Like, okay, they aren't native. I said earlier they're from the Pacific Northwest, so rainbow trout as a species are west of the Rockies.
Yeah.
And so with them not being a native fish, like, what is the occurrences and propensity of natural reproduction? Is it successful? Do they actually contribute offspring to the population? Those are questions that we had an idea of the answers, but we didn't have like great robust data to that. And so we are out of District 3 and some partners doing just that. We're looking at a whole bunch of tributaries in the Cuyahoga drainage across different months of the year to actually quantify the amount of steelhead reproduction and the survival. When they hit the summer stream temperatures in these tributaries, are they getting too warm for trout to survive? And generally the answer is yes already. I mean, we're only 1 year into that work, and we're already seeing that even if they successfully go through the motions to spawn, most of those offspring aren't making it through the summer months, which is actually okay. Like, it's okay from our perspective that this program is, what we raise, and it has, a control knob you can put into the Lake Erie system, the number that we're stocking. So
do they have to spend a year in the tributary before they're going to the lake?
That's right. So in a wild
I don't know if you
scenario,
said that or if I missed that, but you're talking about summer temperatures, and I just realized. So they're staying. We're releasing them as fingerlings, but we're doing that specific to the fact that once they're fingerling, they're ready to go to the big water, and that's why we're seeing that quick migration to the lake. But if natural production does occur, then they are going to want to stay within that stream system for a year to get a little bit more.
Yeah, great catch. So I didn't say that. So yeah, in the wild in the Pacific Northwest, for example, where they're naturally sustained populations, that those spawned out offspring are living in those streams like for a year, and then what's called smolting. So essentially becoming that steelhead life history and moving out into the ocean. And so in, for example, Northeast Ohio, those young would stay in our tributary streams, not even the main stem, in the tributaries of those rivers for a year before they would then smolt out the next spring. And that's where the bottleneck of generally too warm of temperatures.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Again, crazy that in 3 days those things can imprint and then still be coming
Right.
back. So do we OTC test with or treat any of our steelhead for that reproduction analysis?
In years past, we have done some different markings. So the oxytetracycline you're speaking of, where you sort of give them in a bath and the otolith takes on an iridescent, and you can look at it later. We've done that in the past, and it's been an extremely high percentage of captured adult steelhead that were marked in the hatchery. So that is some of the past data I kind of alluded to, that we generally know it's not a heavy contribution of naturally spawned
and that's a
fish.
fairly invasive way of finding out that we've still got the same. So for our listenership and our viewership, otolith.
Otolith. Okay, yeah. Essentially the inner ear bone, if you will, of fish. So freshwater fish have a chamber in their skull, kind of like a gyroscope. So you have this calcium deposit, essentially, that's growing over time, just like trees.
Yep.
And it has a little nerve on it, and it's sort of how the fish knows they're right side up and upside down. And the value of otoliths to researchers is, one, you can actually extract those otoliths cut them in half just like a tree trunk, and put them under a microscope and actually tell their ages based on the rings. So that's how we can age fish if we don't know their age, from stocking or tagging. And then also they absorb the chemicals of their surroundings. So part of that does probably play into imprinting. And then also if we give them a bath of the OTC that you said, a chemical that essentially washes or stains that otolith, that's right, we can see that years later and know like, okay, this fish was from, X event that was an OTC marking. Yep.
Fascinating.
We do that with a number of different fish species. As you all know, I spent a brief period of time in the hatcheries, but we do that with our, I know we do it with our sawguy, and that's one of the ways that we can really kind of keep track. And I think Rich might have talked a little bit about that as well with the whole discussion of Grand Lake St. Mary and knowing that when we're stocking these sawguy that they're not going to reproduce. A lot of OTC testing and analysis went into we're releasing these fish into this body of water, and then we are coming back. Our biologists are spending time on the water, sampling that population to make sure we're not getting any fish that don't have a stained otolith, because that is natural reproduction, which would be problematic in that scenario, not problematic in others.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if I am a novice fisher and I'm interested in steelhead, what is the best way to be set up for success? Like, what gear do I need? Is there anything specialized?
Gonna need a fishing pole.
Yeah.
I need a fishing pole.
It's a place to start.
It's a good place to start.
And I would.
What kind?
Yeah.
Good question.
What gear do I want?
Or maybe what are all the different ways that these fish are fished for? I mean, there's not just fishing in the streams and the tributaries, right? There's open water fishing.
Yeah. So we'll touch on all that. I would suggest spending some time snooping around on some of the different social media platforms about, steelhead forums and steelhead Facebook pages and all that stuff, because
you have some diehards out there.
You can learn a lot quick by just sort of scanning through. One, you got to obviously filter through the noise. But I then, to your question about gear, don't get overwhelmed by how specialized it can look right away. You can only fly fish, or you can only center pin, and there's so many specialized ways that folks like to fish for these, and it's satisfying to that user. This is the challenge. I want to use this gear. But if you just want to travel to one of these
dip your
tributaries
toes in it
and just have
see.
a shot at catching a steelhead, it can be very basic. So from the shore, I guess let's talk about the different ways. In the fall, when they're starting to stage up, you could go up to any of the breakwalls of the harbors of the stocked tributaries, and just a spinning rig with a float and a jig under it, a maggot. You could run spoons or inline spinners, much like you would if you're going to fish for trout in like a stocked pond, because they're still actively seeking out forage fish. So anything that's shiny and flashy and moving, they're going to swipe at in that fall nearshore harbor area. As you get into the actual river runs, kind of the general truism is sort of the colder and sort of closer to January you get, the sort of slower and smaller your presentations need to be. So, in the really true cold months, most steelhead anglers are floating very small jigs or flies, even if it's a fly under a float, or an egg mimic. So an egg sac, or even just a bead that mimics a fish egg. Because at that point in time, those cold water temperatures, the steelhead are going to be towards the bottom and are really only going to be opportunistically swiping at something if it comes right by their nose. They're not in feeding mode. They're in spawning mode, or even just hanging out mode if they've already spawned, just kind of waiting to go out.
Yeah.
On the tail ends of that, the fall and the spring, that's when you can start to be, a little more faster with your presentation. So spinners, rooster tails, if you're fly fishing, like clouser minnows, something that's imitating a fish again. So that's kind of faster speeds, slower in the dead of winter, faster speeds as you come out into the spring again. And then there's the lake aspect of it. And pretty much all the open water fishing season in Lake Erie, you can either purposely target them by trolling certain presentations at usually deeper depths close to the thermocline, which is where the oxygen goes from being present to not being present, or folks just incidentally catch them even trolling for walleye.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So there's a huge start anywhere, really, any time of year.
Yeah, you really could. I think about every month, other than maybe when the rivers are locked up with ice.
Right.
You can target steelhead somewhere and have a reasonable chance at getting them year round. I would say by and large, the vast majority of our angling pressure is those in-river October through April fishery.
Months. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when you're trolling last year we went up on Lake Erie. I'm not a huge angler, Kurt, so we were going
He doesn't have the patience.
Normally I do. Well, we were trolling, so the patience wasn't high on the menu. But when we got back to the fish cleaning area, like there was guys that brought in quite a few steelhead, and they're bringing them in alongside their walleye. So it's something, like you said, they'd probably just change the depth of where they were running those rigs.
Yeah, and
speed.
I'm not a big Lake Erie person myself, but speed and depth, generally you're going to be going out a little farther and a little deeper. And
whenever we target them, like if the walleye are in 40 foot of water in July, the walleye are staged up in 40 foot of water. We're going 2 miles an hour in 40 foot of water. When we are done walleye fishing, the question is usually, do you want to go 7 miles out to 70 foot of water and troll at 3.5 miles an hour? And then you start to get in the steelhead.
Well, now that makes me ask, how far out to Lake Erie do they go? I mean, they go everywhere. They if you guys are doing telemetry work on some of these adult steelhead, are you finding them going all the way to Canada, going all the way east and west?
Yeah, and we're just, like I said, we're just starting some of that telemetry work.
Yeah.
But even just where the different agencies sample them with other gears, the general truism is like further out deep and further to the east. So, I mean, they still are, there are cold water species in the shallowest, warmest Great Lake.
Yeah, there is that.
They're seeking that cold water where there's still oxygen. And so as the summer moves along and, these pockets that we call hypoxia, where there's low oxygen or no oxygen, keep moving out, they're getting further and further out to find that cold water that still has oxygen. And that generally in the peak of the summer is going to be as you go out towards, New York and out to the northeast side of the lake. So, and then they'll move back as it cools down in the fall. They're kind of moving back towards the near shore to the tributaries.
So I guess maybe I'm jumping ahead, but kind of going back, how in-depth, how much work, I assume it's probably lots of work to make these things. You're talking about at Castalia.
Yeah, it is a lot of work. So for one, just getting the eggs. It isn't like, you alluded to our walleye and our saweye program earlier, or muskie, where, at reservoirs in Ohio, we collect those fish, take their eggs, and, in a matter of a couple of days or a week, we have our own homegrown, if you will, fertilized eggs.
Right.
Just getting the eggs for the steelhead program is an endeavor. We, through lots of years of research and research by the other states, we know that when possible, we want wild sourced eggs. They return better, they grow better, they return better to the rivers to create a better fishery. And so we're leaning heavily on neighboring states, most notably Michigan and Wisconsin. And we work closely with their DNRs. This isn't like, like a goodness, I cross my fingers, I hope. I mean, they have great relationships. And they're talking in the fall of the year about the spring collections, so it's a lot of coordination. But we send staff, up to, for example, the Little Manistee Weir in Michigan to work with Michigan DNR to collect eggs there, bring back fertilized eggs, and start them then at Castalia Hatchery. So, there's a lot of coordination to get eggs from other sources and get the numbers we need, while these other states are still having to first and foremost meet their quantities as well, to put our program together. So oftentimes we'll have multiple sources of eggs on station at once at Castalia. We'll have, let's say some fish from Wisconsin and from Michigan and some from Pennsylvania. When I say wild caught, these are, again, none of these are native to the Great Lakes, but these are parentals that have lived in the lake, whether it's Michigan, Erie, wherever, are coming into a river to go through that spawning motion and taking those eggs versus holding parentals in a hatchery year after year, generation after generation, and just continually taking their eggs. There's been enough work that kind of shows that just those fish that are going through that natural progression themselves, their offspring return stronger with more of that homing response back to the tributaries.
It doesn't take long for that to maybe kind of dissipate through the generations.
That's right. That's the thought, yeah.
So I'm assuming because of the fact that those are both locations that stay colder longer, that's why we're not taking Ohio fish, because based off what you're saying, theoretically, the fish that are coming into the tributaries should be producing viable eggs in the Cuyahoga, for instance. So if we were to take the eggs from that fish and then hold it for a year, we're still not seeing the same kind of return on investment as we are with partnership through Wisconsin and Michigan, just more robust population up there?
Well, I would say it's more so the logistics. So if we knew that we were in a season where where the females we would be handling in Ohio tributaries were fish from wild strains that were stocked out originally, they probably would have just as robust returning rates. It's more that this isn't just grabbing, a couple dozen fish that happen to be swimming by. These are actually constructed weirs, like at Michigan, Wisconsin, where fish are coming into, a restricting device in the stream, kind of like cattle gates, if you will.
That was going to be my next question.
And taken from there. So, and they're usually smaller streams than what are like the
Little
size of our
Manistee
tributaries.
is not very big.
That's right.
Piece of water.
So there's a lot of logistical constraints that would come into play if we tried to do that same thing in Ohio, in a scenario where it's not really needed because we have a 40-ish year track record of barring a few exceptions of being able to get the eggs we need.
Well, it doesn't sound like it's broken,
weirs.
so there's no reason to fix it.
That's right. Yeah. And then to your question there, John, about the effort. Almost all of Castalia's effort is spent raising steelhead, and when it's not steelhead, it's the catchable rainbow trout that we raise for the Division of Wildlife to stock in the spring. And so by a species, they're a hatchery of one. They raise rainbow trout, steelhead, and the catchables. And I should know this, but I think there's four full-time folks up there. So that's the kind of effort and scale that we put into the trout programs, including the steelhead.
And that's my first year, or not my first year, but it's my first time this past year to go to Castalia and see how that hatchery is designed and how it actually is designed for trout. It's really neat.
I would like to go see the blue hole spring sometime. I think that would be really fun.
Yeah, they have these giant pumps that pumps the water from there into these big silos that the water goes down through all these filtrations to get the oxygen. And sensors galore. So you can sleep in the middle of the night, and if something got plugged up or alarms are going off and staff are getting there, it's quite the operation. And they step the fish through. So another question about getting the eggs. What about getting some here and some there? They also try to get them all about the same time in the spring, even if they're from like Michigan or Wisconsin, which are similar latitudes, because they're taking sort of all the fish through fry and then changing feed, and they're all then growing at the same rate and size rather than having multiple sizes and stages.
Worrying about stocking in the same pond, and then all of a sudden 20,000 becomes 10,000 because you put 6 inches in and 3 inches, 2 inches in. And guess what?
Oh,
lot.
Yeah. Whoops.
So Castalia, is that open to the public at all?
I was just going to plug that. So if any listener, they welcome visitors. They have certain open house days. So check the Division of Wildlife's website for actual hatchery open houses. But even just calling ahead to the hatchery and asking, hey, is there a good time to get a tour? They are very regularly happy to host folks and just show them where their license dollars and goes to for
all
raising
that
those
work.
fish.
And then the division provides lottery opportunities.
Yeah, a lot of lottery opportunities. So there's a stream there that is stocked, and it is a target-rich environment, as you would say, as an angler or a hunter. And you can apply for that and then get the opportunity to go up to Castalia. I can't remember the fish. It's 2 per person. Feels right, maybe more.
Yeah, I don't remember, but your party, like if you win the lottery, I think you can take 4 or 5 people.
Yeah,
you can make quite a day of it and bring home some fish.
The whole point is to make a day of it. The whole point is it to be worth anyone coming from all the way down on the Ohio River up there to have a good time. And again, target-rich environment. I've never done it, but I certainly look forward to the day where I get the opportunity to, because it looks like it'd be a good time.
Yeah, representing the South 70 over here, we don't have the opportunity for these fish, so it would be great to go. The only time we see anything like this is like you're talking the stocking, where we'll put in the rainbow trout into the ponds for the fishing activities. But
it's a unique opportunity for anglers in the state of Ohio in the fact that it's a clear creek, and there's not too many locations in the state of Ohio where you can walk up to a creek bank and look out there and you can see fish that are good size just swimming there, and you can start to literally just target a fish, and you can lose yourself trying to target said fish while everyone else is catching
out.
all. But
and they do a great job of keeping it accessible. so you don't have to be a pro angler to be able to cast to these fish. And they host great, like wounded veteran programs.
Yeah, there's some really good stuff that happens.
They really leverage a lot of great programming out of there.
Absolutely.
The Rocky River, is that a tributary that you guys put into, or how's that working?
Yeah, the Rocky is. So that's just on the west side of Cleveland. And that's a unique one because it's really not that long lengthwise.
Yeah.
But it's very popular among anglers because 90-ish% of its river length is Cleveland Metro Parks holdings, which are a very angler friendly agency. We have a great relationship with them and their biologist up there. In fact, I'll put a plug in for if you Google Cleveland Metro Parks Fishing Report, it's a great wealth of information that they put on focus on the Rocky, but it really translates to kind of Steelhead Alley in general for kind of what the fishing is like. So
I like that.
Steelhead Alley. Okay,
let's
that is
break
I
that
knew there was going to be
That is the,
eyebrows raised on that.
colloquial name
We should get T-shirts
of Northeast Ohio. Oh, there
Really?
are T-shirts.
So
they
Steelhead
exist.
Alley refers to like all the different tributaries that
like all
folks fish for
from
steelhead.
Vermilion.
Yeah.
East.
So, if you look at a map of Ohio, in the Northeast essentially has this like diagonal shoreline that kind of runs up from Cleveland. That swath is what we call Steelhead Alley. And I really don't know the history of the roots of it, but it's that thin section of Ohio that is
And so it
ripe with
is.
steelhead.
Well, now we have to know. So
There's gotta be
we know
people
that
who
at Port Clinton the walleye drops for the ball drop. We know that the walleye drops. We know Cleveland's got the pierogi. Is there a steelhead drop?
At the New Year.
There's
the
not
New
that I
Year?
know of, but
Oh.
yeah, I think
your
I think we
opportunity.
have
Somebody-
Connie Otter Ashtabula, if you're listening, that's
Yeah.
Shout out Steelhead Alley.
Well, I'm just thinking, we chase turkeys and we chase them in different states, and hunters and anglers set goals on themselves. Now I'm thinking there's got to be folks who are trying to target steelhead in all of these different tributaries. I want to catch one in the Rocky. I want to catch
I
one in
like
the Cuyahoga.
that.
I want to catch one here.
Yeah.
And, especially if you're looking for the big ones.
yeah.
Steelhead Challenge.
I asked for the Rocky because when I was first saw a new officer, I was in District 3 Unit A, and I remember working the Rocky River that fall, and I knew nothing about fly fishing or contact, and these guys were pulling these fish out of the water. I was like, I don't even know what this thing is. I knew what it was, but it was monster fish. We never saw anything like this growing up. So
Well, we haven't done any justice for the anglers or folks that are thinking about angling for this to fully explain what it's like to put one of these on the other end of the line. So while they may be a slow bite in January, I can assure you when they realize that there is tension on their lip, these things are rocket ships.
Really?
They are out of the water. They are breaching the water multiple times, and they are trying to get away and upstream or downstream with a vengeance.
really, so like
They-
like smallmouth but bigger.
More so like
Well, smallmouth.
more so
You
like
make a face like a
maniacs.
smallmouth
yeah.
bass. They fight real
more
hard.
so like sailfish, like
Really?
deep sea fishing.
Wow.
They
Jumps, shakes.
they will scream a reel with the drag
Hence
on.
why they are a fun fish to
They are
target. I
an
assume lots of people are
absolute
chasing for that.
blast. So when we are trolling for them on Lake Erie and you get that hit, it's usually on a planer board because we're trolling. We're trying to get as many different presentations out. Once you get that hit, you usually see the hit and then see the fish in the air.
Really?
And it is typically chaos trying to get just close enough to try and get a net on the fish because they're not going to stop and they are head shaking the whole way through. So the quicker you can get that
so they're
planer
making
board,
it hard on you.
the quicker you can get that planer board off and actually start working that fish, the better. And it's a whole thing.
It's a dance because you got to give them
It's
some
a
line.
dance, yeah.
You can't just like manhandle them in because they're
No.
they'll rip out of the lip or they'll
Yep.
jump and throw it, but you can't give them slack either.
Yep.
And so for traditional spinning gear, you want to have your drag
You
set.
lost me. You lost me right
Okay,
there.
okay.
You can't pull them too tight and you can't give them too much slack. Got to be perfect.
Well,
I'm
that
not
is
gonna
the
be able to
crazy
do that.
part. So I'm like a novice fly angler, and I was out with
Okay.
a guide this fall, and if he's listening, he's probably like, "Oh, Kurt killed me." we hooked into plenty,
Yeah.
and just on a fly reel, it's even an added challenge of keeping the line the right tension, and it was just so hard to keep the line tight enough that they didn't shake it, but not so tight that they just snapped it. And especially they have a tendency to just like run right at your feet. You're wading in the stream, and it'd be nice if they just kind of swam away from you. You could try to play that tension game, but then they come screaming at you. You got all this slack line, and
Yeah.
then the minute they get near you, they're going to turn the other way and bolt.
Yeah.
And
Right.
You know, that walleye,
I was kind of a train wreck.
that
Yeah.
walleye feels like, that fish is just turning on its side and just kind of making you pull him in sideways. 360 degrees of options, and they're
Doing
going to
whatever he
use
wants.
every single one of them twice before you get them.
That's amazing. That's something else. So we've talked about catching them and where we catch them, but how do most people prepare this fish, like to eat?
So I would say most people don't. That's
Really?
actually the first answer. Yeah. So
Trophy.
when we do our angler surveys where we have, creel clerks on the water, I don't know the number exactly, but it's 90% plus catch and release. When people do keep them, mostly what I hear is smoking them.
Really?
Kind of like a smoked salmon. But yeah, it's generally kind of that catch and release to fight another day for the most part.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the exception
Other
to
than
the
trolling,
rule
yeah.
is, so the exception to the rule of that is most of the angling that is done for these is specific to when they're running and in those tributaries.
They want the fight, right?
When you get out on the lake, first of all, and we'll get to this, but usually if we're catching them on the lake, they're going in the cooler. It's just a different kind of mindset at that point in time. I think it's more of a dance when you're in the tributary with the fish, whereas when you're out on the lake trolling, and there might be folks out there that specifically just are ate up with trolling for these, you're going to burn a lot of fuel just trying to target steelhead in the lake. If we catch 1 or 2, 3, it's been a great day, but that might be in an hour and a half worth of effort.
After you got your walleye, probably.
After you got the walleye. So that's generally just not that right, wrong, indifferent. That's how we have fished for them. But one of the big differences, and I don't know if you can speak to this, I hope you can, but as we look at this fish and maybe a little bit of anatomy, and for those of you listening, like the adipose fin is a finless fin, for lack of better terminology. It's kind of a meat fin on the top backside of
That little guy.
of the tail. But as we work our way down, so this is a good representation of a fish that I would expect to see coming out of a stream. It's kind of got a green back with some darker flecking. Along the lateral line, which is the center of the fish, there's almost some rosy pink, and then a silver bottom side. That is typical of what we see when they're coming out of the streams. When we're catching them out of the lake, they are silver. They have a dark silver, almost gray back. And then once you get to that lateral line, you're not seeing any other color other than a white to silver color to that. Is that diet based? Or do you know where that comes from, the difference from when they're in lake running? And we see it in salmon when they come from the ocean as well.
You see it in a lot of fish. You even see it bringing fish from the deep versus shallow, warmer waters. So I guess, do I know? I don't know all the biology or physiology behind it, but I think it's more associated with habitat coming from that deeper, cooler water, low light conditions. Down
I wonder
deep.
how much of it is just its own predator avoidance that's built in. So the deeper they are, dark on the top because you're looking down, light on the bottom, looking up at the sun. You get into the river system and they're dealing with moss, rocks, things like that. So
fish can change color really fast too. I mean, you can see it even when we do fish sampling. In a few hours of handling a fish, you can see some coloration changes. It is amazing how quick that happens. But yeah, to your point about the real silver, chrome fish, anglers in the stream, they'll call them like fresh fish. So they'll even kind of have a hunch of whether a new pulse of runners has come in, if what they're catching are really chrome, really really shiny and silvery, versus if they're starting to have that richer stream color. That's right.
They're pretty fish.
Kind of makes me want to try to catch one, but I'm not good at catching fish, so there's that.
Well, I think
there's a growing guiding industry.
Is
so
there?
There's plenty of people happy
absolutely.
to take you.
I've never fly fished. Never done that at all.
And there's some good organized. That's another, to how to get started in this. There's some great groups that are organized. There's some Trout Unlimited chapters in the northeast part of the state that focus, on steelhead quite a bit. And there's a sort of a statewide umbrella group called the Ohio Central Basin Steelheaders that have been around for a very long time. Great partnership with the Division of Wildlife. And I mean, they'll constantly say at every meeting, like they love to talk to new people interested. So, I mean, if you're from somewhere downstate, let's say, and you're interested in steelhead, absolutely reach out to a group like that, because you will find people happy to
South of 70.
Happy to help. South of 70.
I do know that there are a lot of working groups with it, and a very partnership heavy. We do a lot of different meetings and facilitate that. Phil Hillman, who's no longer with us, but Phil Hillman was like the steelhead the steelhead man, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So there's even a good steelhead fishing access location, and all you have to look up is the Phil Hillman Wildlife Fishing Access Area, and
Conneaut.
you can start right then and there, Abby, and that would put you pretty much where you need to be. And
For all the steelhead.
yeah.
Does
That'd be fun.
does District 3 have any of those workshops? Do they do maybe a steelhead or fly fishing workshop? I know.
Yeah.
I figured they would.
Yeah, we've done some how-tos.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Kurt helped out with quite a few
That's cool.
of those.
And one of our current officers, Officer Hillman, who
Yes.
is Phil's
Oh,
son,
yeah.
Yeah.
he and I together did a how-to
Oh, I
steelhead
didn't
fish.
know that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Zach.
Aw.
Yep.
And very into steelhead fishing himself.
Yes,
so.
I bet.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I didn't want to get too much into making excuses for myself, but earlier when you asked if did I know about steelhead my whole career? So Phil Hillman, who you mentioned, who's
got warm
unfortunately
in here all of a
passed.
sudden.
Yeah, so he was like the godfathers of the Ohio Steelhead program and was my supervisor when I was a fish biologist. So I didn't really need to know much about the program.
You
He
had
handled
the-
it.
yeah.
And so then, I quickly became the point person, and so it was,
Right.
it was a learning curve there. Yeah, so some great folks from the division have spent a lot of their careers getting the program to the place it's at now, knowing what works.
Do you know how many fish we're raising and putting in?
Yeah, so Lake Erie wide, I'll get long answer to your question. Lake Erie wide, the agencies work together. It's called the Lake Erie Committee, part of the Great Lakes Fish Commission. And it's important because when you're managing an interjurisdictional fishery, so a fishery that spans multiple boundaries, provinces, states.
Kind of need to know
you need
what
to-
everyone's doing.
Yeah, you need to be on the same page.
Yeah.
And these committees do that. So as a committee, it's been agreed that sort of the standing acceptable amount of mouths to feed, if you will, would be to stock collectively 2 million steelhead per year into Lake Erie.
Yeah.
And then from there, it gets divvied up across the states, depending on capacities. I mean, there's a lot of sort of factors of who has what allocation. So Ohio's allocation is 450,000. So let's say we wanted to do 550,000. We wouldn't necessarily do that. It would be a conversation with the larger committee.
Mm-hmm.
So we're at a really good place to raise 450,000. Castalia can support that, healthily and reliably. And that has been our benchmark stocking target for 3 decades now.
Okay.
Pile of fish.
That's a lot of fish.
That's a lot of fish.
Thank you for coming on. Hopefully folks at home are learning something or learned something, but unique opportunity here for you to talk to the listenership. Is there anything specifically that you would like to tell the folks that are either out trying to learn how to steelhead fish or any kind of citizen science that they can be helpful with as it pertains to steelhead, or anything that you'd like to kind of get general information out there on?
Yeah. No, thanks for that opportunity. I guess I think 3 ways here. So for the listener who's just intrigued by this and wants to get started, I guess I would encourage, don't make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah.
Some very basic techniques can catch fish, when the water has a little bit of clarity to it, and it's okay to go to the known popular spots.
When in doubt, go with KISS,
The
right?
fish will be
Keep
there.
it
Keep it simple. To the avid steelheader who maybe is listening to this, there's some concerns and questions, and we didn't get into all this, but about what strain we stock when. We're back to fully wild strains right now in the program, and the fishery's going in a good direction. So we'll leave that at that. And then to the citizen science question, I mentioned about how we're doing some work in the Cuyahoga. So, folks that are in that area that maybe are hiking in, one of the metro parks or national park, if you do see what you're pretty sure are small juvenile steelhead, just drop us a line even at the Division of Wildlife. We think we have our sampling sites pretty well figured out of where to look for these, but we're always sort of interested in new observations as we sort of wrap our heads around and quantify where reproduction does and does not occur.
Is that electrofishing sampling? Backpacks?
Yeah, so on our side of things, it's largely backpack electrofishing for those young juveniles.
Which, for clarification, does or does not kill the fish.
Does not.
Yep. Great.
Thank you so much for
Yeah,
coming.
thank you guys.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed our chat with Kurt. Don't forget to subscribe to the Wild Ohio podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tell your friends, tell your family, and we hope to see you outside.
And on YouTube now.
Yeah.
So thanks, Kurt.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you.
it.
Yeah.
Tight lines.